In this podcast episode with Michael Shellenberger, the complexities and cultural tensions shaping contemporary American society are explored with a critical eye on the prevailing ideologies on the left. Shellenberger expresses deep concern about the current state of the nation, emphasizing that society is grappling with a kind of mass radicalization, largely propagated through social media and university systems. By reflecting on cultural shifts beginning around 2012, marked by the rise of identity-focused discourse, terms such as racism and white supremacy skyrocketing in mainstream media, he frames the past decade as a woke reign of terror, characterized by increasing divisiveness, tribalism, and intolerance. Shellenberger stresses that this polarization has contributed to national instability and tragic violence, such as the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which left a profound impact on many, especially parents worried about the future of their children. The surprising callousness and even celebratory responses from certain left-leaning social media circles, according to him, signal a cultural and psychological pathology linked to so-called fake empathy. This fake empathy manifests as deep sympathy toward one's own in-group while fostering cruelty and indifference toward perceived outsiders, a dynamic he attributes in part to social media's effect on interpersonal relationships and societal norms. Examining the current trajectory of left-wing politics, Shellenberger identifies a radical transformation from a once liberal Democratic Party to a radical left orientation, characterized by anti-American, anti-Western civilization, and deeply pessimistic worldviews. He ties this to the role played by universities and social media as breeding grounds for this ideology. Pointing to how leftist academics in influential positions increasingly filter hiring to favor those echoing their radical views, he argues that this has resulted in an echo chamber, intensifying ideological conformity and intolerance. Social media, according to Shellenberger, exacerbates these tendencies by enabling rapid dissemination of emotionally charged content, often detached from the nuance of reality or data. Movements like Black Lives Matter, though rooted in perception, shaped by viral videos rather than precise crime statistics, gained disproportionate influence and became catalysts for further political radicalization. These platforms amplify the voices of younger generations, particularly millennials, who are engaged in aggressive online activism but may lack deep, critical engagement with complex societal issues. A significant theme in the conversation concerns the divergence between objective reality and public perception. Shellenberger highlights that despite statistical evidence showing declines in crime rates, many Americans feel that crime and societal disorder are increasing. This discrepancy is fueled by widespread media exposure to high-profile incidents, particularly through viral videos and omnipresent smartphone cameras, which saturate the public consciousness with images of violence and social unrest. He contrasts public sentiment with empirical data, noting that police killings and violent crime have generally decreased over the decades. Yet, media narratives and social movements have effectively reframed public understanding, often in a way that vilifies institutions like law enforcement and paints America's history and society as fundamentally oppressive. This, Shellenberger contends, fosters a narrative of victimhood that rationalizes challenges to law, order, and traditional structures. The podcast delves deeply into the intellectual underpinnings of the contemporary left's worldview, suggesting it is rooted in a Rousseau-inspired concept that humans are naturally good but corrupted by societal structures. This lens leads to an almost religious ideology that views victims as inherently blameless and oppressors as fundamentally evil. Such thinking, Shellenberger argues, distorts justice and public policy by promoting victimhood as a basis for exemption from accountability. A particularly striking example discussed is the repeated release of individuals with criminal records back into society under the assumption that they are victims of systemic factors like racism or capitalism. This approach, which Shellenberger calls a dream world, fails to protect communities and creates cycles of violence and dysfunction. He asserts that this kind of ideology is not only logically flawed, but dangerously detached from the reality of human nature, free will, and societal needs for order and personal responsibility. Shellenberger identifies intellectual cowardice and pride as foundational problems in modern cultural debates. He laments the widespread unwillingness to engage with facts that contradict prevailing ideological narratives, attributing this defensiveness to ego, professional stakes, and social pressures. Instances such as his own experiences challenging entrenched climate science claims reveal how defenders of orthodoxy resort to ad hominem attacks rather than open dialogue. This scenario is compounded by large institutional incentives in academia, media, and politics that reward conformity and punish dissent. The result is a censorship culture in which truth is subordinated to ideological goals, producing widespread misinformation. He cites Malcolm Gladwell's recent hesitant admission about male participation in female sports as emblematic of a broader environment where expressing inconvenient truths invites social and professional penalties. An extended discussion is devoted to contradictions within the left's approach to gender identity and biological sex, particularly as it pertains to sports. Shellenberger explains how feminist ideology simultaneously promotes the erasure of biological differences while paradoxically venerating stereotypical female traits like empathy and inclusivity. This incoherent framework leads to policies allowing males who identify as female to dominate female sports, undermining fairness and women's rights. He also explores the psychology behind cancel culture and social ostracism, suggesting that female social strategies of exclusion have fueled woke culture's punitive aspects. The result is a surreal, unsustainable social order where victims of sexual violence are paradoxically exposed to harm in the name of ideological inclusivity. Shellenberger calls this another manifestation of the dream world mindset that has no logical connection to empirical reality, but persistently influences public policy and social norms. Examining generational shifts, Shellenberger observes a distinct bifurcation between young men and women. Young men, particularly those dissatisfied with the toxic femininity and radical leftist narratives, are gravitating towards conservative figures and ideologies that affirm traditional masculinity and personal responsibility. Voices like Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate have become influential by offering alternative models of manhood grounded in strength, action, and grounded reality. Conversely, many young women appear more invested in progressive causes, often driven by fears of lost rights and career opportunities. This gender divide highlights deeper cultural tensions about identity, sexuality, and societal roles. Shellenberger notes the complex contradictions within feminism related to female sexuality and vulnerability that fuel both liberation narratives and protectionist impulses, intensifying cultural conflict. The conversation turns toward demographic challenges facing Western societies, with a sharp focus on declining birth rates and family formation. Shellenberger identifies cultural and ideological shifts, especially those influenced by radical feminism, hookup culture, and the dismantling of traditional religious values as primary drivers of this fertility crisis. He argues that liberal policies on abortion, contraception, and gender roles have inadvertently disincentivized childbearing and stable family structures. The solution, as posited, requires a cultural recalibration that supports family life, embraces modest parenting expectations, and potentially restores certain societal norms regarding marriage and child-rearing. However, Shellenberger is realistic about the difficulties because many core liberal values are deeply entrenched and unlikely to be reversed. The long-term demographic and cultural consequences, he cautions, are profound and may reshape geopolitical dynamics, with more religious and traditional societies gaining influence. Shellenberger is especially critical of the current university and K-12 educational systems, which he views as largely irredeemable centers of radical leftist indoctrination. He argues that they propagate damaging narratives about American history and culture while undermining core competencies like reading and mathematics. The skewed teachings portray America as uniquely evil and call for the dismantling of its foundational principles, leaving students disoriented and alienated. He underscores the importance of reviving vocational education and reducing the perceived necessity of college attendance, proposing that fewer young people pursue degrees in ideologically driven institutions. Alternative educational models that reject woke dogma and elevate trades and technical skills could help rebuild the workforce and social fabric. However, scaling such changes nationally remains a formidable challenge. A recurring theme is the essential role of law enforcement and social order in maintaining functional societies. Shellenberger stresses that progressive policies aimed at defunding the police or excusing repeated criminal behavior have damaged community safety and trust in institutions. This erosion of law and order allows vicious cycles of crime and violence to flourish, disproportionately harming vulnerable populations. He critiques the ideology that views all offenders as victims deserving compassion without accountability, highlighting the need for realistic, pragmatic approaches to justice that balance empathy with public safety. Shellenberger maintains that individual responsibility, societal norms, and a shared belief in the fairness of the system are critical to reducing crime and fostering social cooperation. Despite the sobering analysis, Shellenberger expresses cautious optimism about emerging cultural and political trends. He believes that a pendulum swing is underway, with conservative and nationalist forces gaining renewed coherence and influence in American and global politics. The 2024 U.S. presidential election and similar shifts abroad demonstrate a growing rejection of radical left-wing agendas and a reclaiming of patriotism, family, and faith-based values. Nevertheless, he emphasizes that politics alone cannot resolve the deeper malaise afflicting Western civilization. Rather, he argues for a spiritual revival grounded in Christian ethics and community renewal as the foundation for genuine healing. Authentic love for neighbors, transcending political divides, along with renewed commitments to family and faith, represent the most promising paths toward restoring social cohesion and moral order.